All right, y'all. So this is supposed to be footage of a flying saucer UFO in Russia. Let's check it out. Nah, I'm skeptical about that one. That's gotta be some CGI type stuff there. Gotta be. So now we're comparing USA and Russia's best MLRs in Ukraine.
HIMARS is a very specific and advanced multiple launcher rocket system that is a MLRS that adds precision capability. They're basically truck mounted rocket launchers. So Smersh is one of the top MLRS systems that Russia has developed. It is the closest comparable to HIMARS. There's important differences in the way that they're used, and there's important differences in their capabilities that we can get into. But I think that in some ways those are instructive to the ways the war is being carried out. Hi, I'm Sam Feldman. I am a defense editor with Insider, and I'm a U.S. Navy veteran and former ordnance officer. HIMARS generally fires three kinds of rockets: unitary warhead and area effects warhead. Those ranges are about 50 miles, and it's able to fire 6 of those at a time. There is also a way that instead of carrying six rockets, it carries one rocket. In this case, it's actually what's called tactical ballistic missile, known as ATACMS. And ATACMS has a 190-mile range. ATACMS is a much more expensive system. It's roughly...
I know y'all looking at me like, you didn't know this? No, bro. Never did a day in the military in my entire life. You know what I mean? And don't have any family members that's close to me to give me the military stories, how it was, what type of things they operated on, stuff like that. Have those talks. I've never had those. So when I come in search of answers and different things like that, man. Some of y'all are lucky to have people you know had those experiences, been in the military. All I get is, yeah, I was in the military. That's it. That's it. So seeing this is all brand new to me, and hearing this information and digesting this information is new.
$1.4 million per ATACMS, or the unitary warhead are just much cheaper. They're about $100,000 for each rocket. The BM-30 Smersh, with its unguided rockets, has a range of about 43 miles. With its upgraded rockets, which are called Tornado S rockets, they are navigation system aided. Those have a range of about 74 miles. Jeez. That exceeds the range of the comparable HIMARS unitary and area effects warheads. HIMARS is a highly precise system. It essentially has a evaluated accuracy within about 2 meters. You could target it for the front of a Humvee and it might hit the rear door. The BM-30 Smersh, with its upgraded rockets, which are called Tornado S rockets, the Russian manufacturer Rostec says that it's much more accurate than previously inertial navigation system guided rockets. Can we quantify that? No. We are only seeing some of the usage in Ukraine. It seems to be fairly limited usage. HIMARS has about a 4 to 5 minute reloading time. The way that crews typically operate, once they fire the rockets and launch point, they are what's called shooting and scooting. So they are getting out of that area, and they are likely going to a resupply point. In the case of HIMARS, it can either carry one ATACMS or it can carry one pod of 6 other rockets with shorter ranges. Those pods are basically moved all together in one piece. It's like moving like a pallet. That's done within about 4 to 5 minutes. The BM-30 Smersh relies on a servicing vehicle. That tends to take somewhere between 20 and 38 minutes to reload this. Part of the reason is that the servicing vehicle is loading in rockets one by one via a crane. So instead of moving one pallet like HIMARS, it's moving 12 individual rockets. The HIMARS system allows the crew to be much more efficient to be ready for that next fire mission sooner.
Now I'm gonna be like leery of log trucks when I see them from now on. Did y'all see that? Did y'all pay attention to that? Y'all see that, right? I didn't even think about that ever before, but now that's in my brain.
The BM-30 Smersh has a top speed of about 37 miles per hour, and HIMARS has a speed of around 53 miles an hour. Part of the reason for that is that HIMARS is a lighter system. HIMARS only carries 6 rockets. The BM-30 carries 12 rockets, and so it's just a heavier truck. It carries a heavier load. These systems are not defined by ground speed. They're not tanks that are trying to shatter through lines. The speeds of the vehicles allow for more readiness to be ready for more missions. We don't see like direct video evidence that the HIMARS has come up directly against BM-30 MLRS. The U.S. has supplied 39 HIMARS launchers and the artillery, rocket artillery they need. They've been employed by Ukraine for 18 months, and none have been destroyed to date. A lot of MLRS have been destroyed on both sides. Russia's lost a huge number of MLRS, well over 300 different vehicles, and those include the BM-21. There are 2 BM-30 Smershes that have been destroyed. About 80 BM-27 Uragons have been destroyed. It seems like there's 2 things going on. The first comes down to the Russian satellite navigation system, GLONASS. We know that GLONASS is not as accurate as GPS. That may be contributing to the lack of observed pinpoint accuracy. It also is likely a failure of intelligence. The system of Russian targeting seems not to range much deeper than the Ukrainian front lines. Instead, Russia's mainly used its rockets as area attack weapons. Researchers have found evidence that the Russians fired them at volume into Kharkiv, the country's second largest city. And this kind of encapsulates the Russian employment of MLRS. They use it primarily as an unguided brute force weapon. The Ukrainians are getting targets for HIMARS, sending it on fire missions that with the range, HIMARS can fire from a safe distance behind the front lines, and then it relocates, and the Russians haven't figured out an effective way to deal with that yet, and so essentially it's been operating with impunity. Don't expect HIMARS to be a wonder weapon any longer. There's growing signs that the Russians are jamming the GPS signals upon which HIMARS rounds depend for their pinpoint accuracy. The Ukrainians, with a much smaller artillery arsenal, depend on accuracy over the volume of fire that Russia can command.
So I don't know if y'all remember a while back hearing about it. Maybe some of you did, some of you may have not. But McDonald's left and pulled out of Russia. So now I guess they have a replacement. So this video here is what does Russia's rebranded McDonald's look and taste like. Let's check it out. And thought about that. What would life be like without McDonald's? Now, even myself, I'm not really an avid McDonald's user like that. I don't go there all the time. You could probably count on one hand how many times a year I have McDonald's, and it's probably all breakfast. So, but I still know, you know what I mean? I remember that childhood kid myself and my kids loving the Happy Meals and different things like that. You know, it's still an impact. So I never really sat back and thought what type of impact we would have without a McDonald's. Will we feel it, or will we just replace it with a new chain? So have you ever stopped and asked yourself, or even thought about it? Maybe it never crossed your mind. You know, maybe you don't think about stuff like this, but my mind is crazy. It thinks, why is the Guantanamo Bay prison still open?
This is a long-term war. This is a different type of enemy than we're used to. And we're adjusting our thinking to the new type of enemy.
Days after the 9/11 attacks, President George W. Bush launched the global war on terror. In October 2001, he sent the military to invade Afghanistan and hunt down members of Al-Qaeda and its ally, the Taliban. It also offered cash rewards to anyone who would help capture a terrorist, often enough money to change lives. So many in Afghanistan and Pakistan took advantage of this offer and turned hundreds of men over, often with little evidence. The US then sent those men to secret prisons called black sites, where they interrogated and tortured them. but within a month they started searching for a larger, permanent prison to consolidate all these prisoners, eventually settling on this old Navy base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. In January 2002, the first detainees began arriving. One of them was Moath al-Alawi, who spent the next 2 decades in this prison because the US government deemed him too dangerous to be set free. But they never charged him with a crime, and he's not alone. Hundreds of men were imprisoned in Guantanamo. Few were charged with a crime, some were tortured, and none received a fair trial. It's a prison that's operated outside the bounds of law. So how did the US get away with this? And why is Guantanamo Bay still open?
There are 2 myths about the people who were picked up. One is that they are all hardened, capable terrorists. The other is that they were all innocent shepherds.
This is Dan Freed. He worked in the US Foreign Service for over 40 years and was assigned to Guantanamo in 2009.
The conclusion I had is there was kind of a bell curve. At one low end, there were actually hardened terrorists.
Like this man, Osama bin Laden's personal secretary.
There were others that were sometimes petty criminals and drug dealers, not great people, but not criminal masterminds, not terrorists. And the top of the bell curve were people just a little more involved than what I just described. At the other end were people who were swept up and shouldn't have been there at all.
Like a group of Uyghur men, members of a mainly Muslim ethnic group who were fleeing persecution in China.
And they wound up in Al-Qaeda camps, and we didn't know what to do with them, and so they ended up in Guantanamo.
In fact, many detainees were put in Guantanamo based on little evidence, yet Bush officials often described them all as terrorists.
I mean, these are people...
Am I the only one shocked by that? Anybody else know about that? I didn't know about I've never heard about that. To me, Guantanamo Bay is always, you've heard the name, you heard about Al-Qaeda and all of them being placed there, but that's been it. That's the extent of it. It's always been an enigma. It's always been hush when it comes to that reason. That's the reason they did it in the first place and put them there. So, yeah, I had no clue with this, though.
That would gnaw through hydraulic lines in the back of a C-17 to bring it down. Very, very dangerous people.
By 2003, there were nearly 700 Guantanamo detainees, and virtually none of them were charged with a crime.
The American flag flies again over our embassy in Kabul. Terrorists who once occupied Afghanistan now occupy cells at Guantanamo Bay.
The Bush administration chose Guantanamo Bay largely because of its unique location. It was under US control, but it wasn't technically inside the US, so they claimed US law wouldn't apply to the detainees held here. If they put them in a US prison, they'd have to either charge them with a crime and put them on trial, or release them. In other words, under US law, prisoners would have ways to get out.
For bad reasons, they didn't trust the criminal justice system. It gives too many rights.
You hear that, right? You hear that, right? No. He got to say that again. He got to say that again.
Get out.
For bad reasons, they didn't trust the criminal justice system. It gives...
Oh, really? You don't say. Huh? Let me give you my shock face. Huh? What? You don't? That's interesting.
There's too many rights to prisoners. There was a sense that the old rules had to be thrown out.
The US also claimed that international law didn't apply to these detainees either, even though 196 countries, including the US, signed the Geneva Conventions, a set of laws protecting prisoners of war. But for those laws to apply, the US would have to define the detainees as prisoners of war. Then they couldn't interrogate them and would have to release them as soon as the conflict ends.
We didn't want to give them those rights. Because we were so fearful of a new terrorist attack, we wanted to interrogate. And frankly, some parts of the US government interrogated through torture. I mean, that's fact.
So instead of charging them as criminals or calling them prisoners of war, the US made up a new term: unlawful enemy combatants. The US claimed it could hold unlawful enemy combatants without charges in Guantanamo indefinitely, and the detainees couldn't challenge it in court. But the US could prosecute them in a new court system run entirely by the military. These courts were designed to be complex, with rules that heavily favored the US government. For example, the government could introduce evidence without showing it to the detainee first. This made Guantanamo Bay Prison a legal black hole.
The original sin is that we created an institution outside and designed to be outside the rule of law.
No more torture in our name!
And shut it down and release everybody.
Justice for Guantanamo detainees, now a cause célèbre among human rights activists.
World leaders, allied governments, and US politicians began calling for the closure of Guantanamo. Plus, Bush officials recognized that it was actually hurting the war on terror.
Gitmo was also a great recruiting tool. There were all these terrorist videos about how evil the Americans were, and we have to fight back because they imprison people without any legal basis. They torture people.
Eventually, the Supreme Court stepped in. In a series of decisions, the court ruled that Guantanamo detainees were entitled to challenge their imprisonment in court. It was clear the US would soon have to let many of these detainees out. So the Bush administration reviewed every case and set up a transfer process.
Pretty simple process, yeah. Move them back, mainly to Afghanistan. Nobody asked a lot of questions.
Over a 5-year period, the Bush administration transferred 532 detainees and only convicted 3 through the military courts. 5 detainees died in the prison. 4 of them were reportedly suicides. That left 242 in Guantanamo when he left office, with some hope that the prison would close.
Guantanamo will be closed no later than 1 year from now.
On his second day in office, Barack Obama signed an executive order to close Guantanamo within a year. His administration split the detainees into 3 groups and laid out a plan with more paths out. The first group included about half the detainees, who would be transferred either to their home countries, or for those whose home countries were too dangerous or unstable, the US would negotiate deals with other countries to take them. Or they'd be released to the US. This was the plan for the Uyghur Men. A second group would be tried as criminals in a US federal court, including 5 men who helped plan the 9/11 attacks. But that still left a third group.
There was a category of people we didn't feel comfortable transferring, but without sufficient evidentiary basis to put them on trial.
This final group of several dozen would be moved to a super-maximum security prison in Illinois. Then Guantanamo could be closed.
It was a good enough plan. It had risk, but keeping Guantanamo open has risks too.
Now, I believe that any plan to close Guantanamo that includes bringing these terrorists into the United States, Mr. President, is a mistake.
That was the one I was thinking about and was hesitant about right there. That one there, I was thinking, like, you've imprisoned somebody who may or may not have done the crime. Then you want to release them here? If they wasn't mad before, they probably are mad now. And you're gonna release them here? I just don't understand that one there, man. You put us all at risk doing that.
Do so would be nothing short of an invitation for Al Qaeda to operate inside our homeland.
In my view, these men are exactly where they belong.
In Congress, Republican politicians fiercely opposed every aspect of the plan. They pushed back against transfers and putting any detainees on trial in the US.
It will make America a more dangerous place, and it will allow them the platform to spew their hateful ideology.
They even attacked the plan to move some into the Supermax prison.
You're also putting people who would then start plotting for their escape from the outside in America's neighborhoods.
But all of a sudden when Obama comes in, oh no, you can't let people go because you're letting terrorists out. By the spring of '09, this narrative was already set. Obama administration, soft on terrorism. It's fair to ask tough questions. What's not reasonable is making it impossible for Obama when you didn't ask any hard questions about Bush.
Ultimately, both Republicans and Democrats passed bills that blocked any Guantanamo detainee from coming to the US for any reason, including for trial, imprisonment, or release. Then the Obama administration folded.
They gave up at the first sign that it would take a lot of political capital to close Gitmo. But y'all made a big deal of it, so you better mean it. The Obama administration didn't mean it enough.
The only 2 options detainees had stayed in place but got much harder. The military courts were extremely slow and ineffective. 3 convictions had been overturned by 2016, and transfers became more complicated. Many of the detainees were from Yemen, but couldn't be transferred back after conflict broke out there in 2011. So the US would have to convince other countries to take them. That was Dan's job.
For years and years, the American government has said, these are the worst of the worst. These are terrorist masterminds. And now I'm saying, no, they're actually not. We shouldn't have asked other countries to take them if we weren't willing to take them.
Dan negotiated transfers for 17 Uyghur men who were not allowed to be released to the US. They'd been held in Guantanamo for more than a decade. Over 8 years, the Obama administration moved 197 detainees out of Guantanamo and convicted 5 through the military courts. 4 more died inside, 3 reportedly from suicide. That left 41 detainees with a new president who wanted to keep the prison open.
We're going to keep, as you know, Gitmo, we're keeping that open, and we're going to load it up with bad dudes.
In 2017, Donald Trump took office as a fervent supporter of keeping Guantanamo open. In 4 years, his administration only transferred out 1 detainee. In 2021, when President Biden took office, Moath al-Alawi had been in Guantanamo for 19 years. According to his testimony, he went on a series of hunger strikes to protest his detention, and described his life as an endless horror movie. But on January 11, 2022, Biden approved Alawi and 4 others for transfer. For Guantanamo to close, the Biden administration needs to transfer the last remaining detainees, and the military courts need to conclude trials for the 10 who are currently stuck in the system, including the 5 alleged 9/11 plotters who have been on trial for a decade.
Once you start them outside the rule of law, bringing them in the rule of law is a lot trickier than you think. Don't throw out the rule book in a fit of passion. You'll regret it. We did.